All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Levi Bachmeyer. I have the privilege of serving as the school district's business manager. We are also welcomed by Superintendent Beth Sleddy, who is actually just coming back from a meeting in Bismarck, having just recently been appointed to the governor's task force for the K-12 Coordinating Council. So Beth, I think you've got good internet, and feel free to jump in at any point. But just want to say thank you all before we jump in here for taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate in this really important conversation about the school district's facility needs. You're going to see a couple things. First, the QR code in the bottom left-hand corner can be scanned using your cell phone. That's one way to submit a question that will be answered by either the superintendent or myself. You'll also see a link down in the description for a Microsoft form, which can also be used to submit any questions that you may have. Once we get to through the presentation, we'll turn it over to the wonderful Travis Gavin, who will help guide us through the question and answer portions. For the sake of time this evening, we won't be sharing comments, but we definitely want to answer as many questions as we can. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So, Superintendent Sleddy, do you want to kind of kick us off and talk a little bit about our process and how we ended up with the projects that the board ultimately approved?
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay, Levi?
Yes, we can hear you, Beth.
Okay, very good. I will jump in. It's very bright and sunny where I am, so I turned my camera off. But just to start this off, the long-range facility planning process is a process that we've used in the district as long as I can look back. Whenever there are needs in the district, the board appoints the superintendent to bring together a group of stakeholders that will study all the issues and really examine what the needs are, taking into account what are maybe wants, what are needs, what are critical. And that is exactly what happened this past year. We were able to start that task force in September of 22, and that task force advanced all the way through March of 23. This was our largest task force in our history. It had approximately 80 members, and the members represented a lot of people, including our community, our business owners, parents, families.
On your phone.
And are you still able to hear me, or are we still having technical issues with that?
We can hear you, Beth. It's okay.
Okay. And so they continue to meet throughout the course of the year. And there were several projects that were being considered for the bond referendum. I'll give you an example of how that process worked if Levi wants to advance the slide. At each meeting, we would bring together maybe a specialist. So when we were considering what the needs were at South Elementary School, that was a process where we brought the problems that we were seeing and the growth that was happening, or expansions that needed to be made. And then that task force really studied what the options were. It actually branched into a subcommittee where they looked at, should we build on that same plot of land? Should we build up? Should we abandon this space and move across the street? Should we put a school somewhere else? And so throughout that process, that work would happen each time we met. And then the members of the task force were tasked with voting on which of them they felt were the most necessary to be included. Keep in mind that out of the 80 task force members, district office leaders were not voting members. We were simply there to provide information and to answer questions. And so through that, if a project did not get 80%, it was not included on the recommendation to the board. So after the work was completed with the task force, their recommendations were brought to the board, and then the board had the option of accepting those recommendations as they were, or to making adjustments as they were needed. And that work did happen at a board meeting. And so what you see tonight in this presentation are only those projects that the committee members had 80% consensus on. And really the need is very simple. If you look at this chart, if we are bringing in approximately 1,100 kindergartners and we are graduating 800 seniors, you can see that even without new families moving to the area, we're growing by about 300 students per year. And the next chart really identifies over the last several years how much growth we've really seen. So if we averaged over the course of the last 10 years, some years we had about 180 students that were new. Other years we had more than 700 new learners. Over the past 10 years, it's been about 440 learners per year. And so that growth is really the reason why we're coming to you tonight. And this was the chart that I was just referencing, just showing that growth over the past many years. Interesting to point out, if you go all the way back to when I started, I've been superintendent for 6 years, but I've been in the district for, this is my 30th year. And my first job was at Harwood. And at that time we had approximately 4,500 learners. Whereas this year we have about 13,000. So you can see that the line that shows where we are today, and that growth is expected and projected according to our SP and associates, the demographic models that we're getting. We are seeing that growth coming for the next several years. At this time, West Fargo Public Schools is the second largest district in the state of North Dakota. We're about 1,000 more than Fargo and about 1,000 less than Bismarck. We're expected to exceed Bismarck in about 4 years. And you can see the chart on the left upper corner where there's a blue line that shows Liberty Middle School is the largest middle school in the state of North Dakota, with Cheney Middle School coming in at 4th, but not by much. And then in the bottom, you can see that Cheyenne High School is the largest high school in the state, and not by much, with West Fargo High School being 3rd. And as we're looking at these numbers, it's important to note that over the past task force years of work, that they have studied school size and really come to the conclusion that they're comfortable with our high schools being about 1,550, but no larger, our middle schools being right around 1,200, and keeping our elementary schools right in that 550 range, which is 4 classrooms per grade level. Some of our schools are a little smaller than that, but trying to keep our schools right in those size ranges. And I will let Levi take it from here.
Great, thank you, Superintendent Sleddy. So what you're going to see on this slide is just a brief summary in a pie format of the various projects that were ultimately recommended to the school board. We'll dive into each one individually, but the big takeaway here is we have a relatively small number of projects really driving the lion's share of this recommendation. Here in blue, you'll see a new elementary school. In orange, the expansion of Horace High School. In gray, the expansion of Heritage Middle School. And in yellow, renovations and expansions of South Elementary. So when we go through these this evening, just so you can kind of keep in mind, what does this mean as far as the overall package goes? We have a lot of, I think, important things in here as defined by our task force, but it's really these 4 big ticket items that are really driving a big portion of the cost. So the first one is a new elementary school to be located somewhere in the Hawks feeder system. We put potentially the Mustang feeder system only out of a recognition that we did not foresee the need for Meadowlark to come on as soon as it did. But the feeder system, which you're going to see in a couple times throughout this presentation, really refers to all of the schools that ultimately end up in a specific high school. So a feeder system is made up of several elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school within our neighborhood school model. So when we say the Hawks feeder system, we mean anything, any elementary, middle, or high school that ultimately ends up graduating at Horace High. The Mustang feeder system is the same thing, elementaries, Liberty Middle, or Cheyenne High School itself. Then the Packer feeder system is the elementary schools that feed into Cheney Middle School, which ultimately goes to West Fargo High. So the school district does own land on 64th Avenue South, which is where the new roundabout is going in, just off County Road 17, about a mile to the east. And so that is likely the location of where the school would need to be built. But we would continue to watch our where our enrollment's occurring and make sure that we are being thoughtful about where that new school would need to be. The projected need based on our current projections is by the 2027-2028 school year. I'll go through these next two rather quickly. Heritage Middle School in the next slide refers to Horace High School. We have a history in the school district of only building what is needed at the time of the referendum vote. This goes back all the way to West Fargo High School and its cornerstone that was laid in 1987. And then the first expansion was then planned in the early 90s, similarly with Cheyenne being built out in phases. The same approach was taken for Heritage and Horace. We have a slide coming up here in a little bit that talks about some of the reasons why that might be the case. You know, we've heard many questions or maybe some concerns about, well, why didn't you just build it out to full size the first time? And we'll get into that a little bit more as well. But really what these two slides suggest is there's known needs for space in the future, and that both the expansion, if approved, for Heritage Middle School and Horace High School would bring those two buildings to the same size as the other feeder systems in the school district. I think as the superintendent mentioned, we have some of the largest schools in the state already. It would bring Heritage up to a maximum capacity of about 1,200 learners and bring the high schools up to about 1,550. Those needs are in the next 3 and 4 years, respectively. So this is just a slide based on some questions and feedback that we've gotten. Why didn't the task force in 2018 just build Heritage and Horace out all the way? And we touched on that a little bit before, in that our historical approach has been to build in phases. The biggest reason for that is to help manage the amount of debt that the school district is paying for at any one time. So just like individuals own a mortgage or a car loan, we're trying to be thoughtful about trying to pay down as much debt before new debt has been taken out. It has been the historical approach of the school district. So that way, a singular bond is not placing an even higher impact on taxpayers. But as some debt is retired, some is added on as a way to keep up with our growth, but also be cognizant of the impact that this has on taxpayers. So that's one of the biggest reasons. The other reason, which I know is hard in our current environment to think about inflation not being dramatic. If you look at these dots under the date labels of 2014, 16, 17, and 18, you will see the 4 elementary schools that were built directly before the COVID pandemic. And if you look at whether it's the inflation adjusted costs or the actual costs per square foot, it was pretty consistent and almost flat in terms of the year over year inflation. So if the task force at that time said, we don't want to go ask for voters for more than what we think we need right now, there is some advantage to building this out in phases, which allows us to retire some debt so the impact to taxpayers isn't so dramatic right away. And if inflation has been relatively flat, there may not be a huge penalty for waiting. I think one can see at least some of the rationale about why the task force in 2018 would have gone that direction. Now, obviously, if they would have had the gift of foresight to see the global pandemic, the supply chain issues, and the workforce challenges that we are experiencing currently, Is it reasonable that they may have come to a different conclusion? I think so. You can see over here on this 2022 graph line, this was the cost per square foot for Meadowlark Elementary, which is currently under construction. And so now in our current reality, I think there is a working assumption that the longer we wait, the higher these costs go. And so needing to be thoughtful about what that means for our taxpayers, as well as the facility needs for our students. Superintendent Sleddy, do you want to take these next couple?
Sure. So this next is expansion of our early childhood special education services. We have a preschool special education program currently located at the Ladone Center. That program is very busy with little 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who have special needs, and we are in need of more space for that as well. But also, currently, all of our learners with special needs in that age range with the preschool all go to the same location. So you can see that those who live the furthest south have quite the drive in the morning for these little learners. And with the need for more space, we would be looking to expand our early childhood special education services, possibly to the new Meadowlark location if this would pass. And it would expand our need to accommodate about 40% more learners in that space. In addition, we are also looking to acquire more land. As Mr. Bachmeyer has shared, it is advantageous for us to get out ahead of these situations when purchasing land. So we are purchasing by acreage instead of what we've had to do when we have not had land and we run out of space in town. And so we do have land, as we mentioned, in the Hawk feeder system for a new elementary school if this should pass. But thinking even further ahead down the road, as the FM diversion is being completed, we know that the north side of town is going to expand with residentials and everything else that we have seen on the south side. And so wanting to get out ahead of that, so we're in position to purchase more land and to be ready if we need more schools up north. And then renovations and expansions. We've always had a priority that we ensure that as we are building new facilities, that we're taking care of our existing facilities. And although we can't have identical spaces, we do try to have equitable spaces. So we know that each of our schools are somewhat unique, but through the work of the task force, they've come to the conclusion of some things that they want to make sure that we continue. One would be a multi-purpose room at West Fargo High School. We currently have a multi-purpose space at Horace High School and Cheyenne, which is very much utilized not only during the day for our learners as a larger classroom space, but also after school hours for staff and for community events in the evening. We are also looking for an inclusive playground at that early childhood preschool center, as I had mentioned, for little 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who have disabilities, might be in a wheelchair, who cannot access the playground as it is now. We're looking at special education improvements district-wide to support learners and educator safety, restroom renovations, renovations to our older elementary schools to ensure that we have dedicated space for programming consistent with our newer elementary schools, and then flexible seating for all secondary schools. And so we've had some questions about what that seating looks like. As we are advancing and moving more towards preparing our learners for to be choice ready and to provide opportunities for collaboration and allowing them to be working in settings that allows for collaboration. Some of our classrooms are transitioning parts of their room or adding furniture to their space as we are able to accommodate for some of that learning. That was an ask of our teachers as to what they would be hoping that they could have as we move forward, so that they are in environments that are very ready for that type of work, and flexible seating was one of them. And then renovations at South Elementary, I had mentioned that earlier to you. This was one of the projects that really the task force spent a lot of time on, and in fact branched into a sub committee that really studied it further. And through all the options of, completely completely redoing the school, which as you saw is about $34.5 million, they decided that they would stay on the existing space and could save taxpayer dollars by keeping parts of the building such as their gym and then the office space, as well as they would be able to keep the school open if we renovated in phases. And so that would happen, that work and more explanation about how that would work would come later. But we did something similar when we gave Berger Elementary a bit of a facelift. And so we have some ideas on how we can make that happen. And it will save quite a bit of money for the taxpayers. And a third sheet of ice. So when we built the West Fargo Sports Arena, at that time, ice was a need, and we built the space to have 2 sheets of ice with the possibility of expanding to 3. Mr. Bachmeyer talked to you a little bit about the feeder systems, and with the 2 sheets of ice, that is allowed us to have our teams share that space. But as the district expands, we can add a 3rd sheet of ice, and each feeder system would have its own designated sheet of ice. But what's beneficial about this project is that instead of doing that work all on our own at a estimated cost when we were originally talking about this of $15 million, and now as we see the interest rates are going up and the cost of buildings are going up, maybe up to $17 million, we can partner with the West Fargo Youth Hockey and the West Fargo Park District and share the costs for the ice. And that would be at the Veterans Memorial Arena. So Packers on the north side would have a sheet, and then on the south side, the Hawks and the Mustangs would also. And the last project is security and safety upgrades. We have 3 schools that currently do not have sprinkler systems. We do have protections against fire, but the sprinkler system is the final need that we see for West Side, South, and Eastwood. But then we're also always looking to ensure that our spaces are safe, and that if we would have an intruder or somebody is in our schools and shouldn't be or is behaving in a way that we need to contain them, we would advance and have interior lockdown door systems so that we could see them on our surveillance, which we have at all of our schools, but we'd also have the ability to contain them in a part of the school to protect other learners in the building and to get to that person more quickly. Mr. Bachmeyer, you can take it from here. Did I miss anything on those projects before you talk about the taxpayer impact?
No, I think you laid them out well. If anyone, again, I'll just refer folks who may be watching right now that we've got a link to a Microsoft form in the description of this video. Please log any questions that you may have on anything related to the process, which we've discussed so far, or any of the specific projects, and we'll be sure to dive into those certainly in more detail. So taxpayer impact, what is this going to cost? So I'm going to start with the table in the orange down at the bottom, because at the end of the day, that is, I think, the easiest way to understand what the costs would be if nothing else happened in the school district. So if we didn't continue to grow as a community, if we did not continue to retire debt, this would be the highest impact worst case scenario. But I want to make it clear that if you owned a $300,000 home, you would not be paying $218 every year for the next 20 years. Because again, like we had talked about earlier, the district continues to pay down some of its outstanding debt. Superintendent and I like to joke that we actually met back in 2004. I was a 7th grader at Cheney Middle School. She was an assistant principal. And not only does that story underscore how long we've worked together, but also ironically, Cheney Middle School is a building that we actually just paid off this past summer. And so we usually issue debt for 20 years. And if you think about all of the building that we've done over the last 20 years, as we pay off those costs, that lowers the impact that we need to pass along to taxpayers. So this is, again, the worst case scenario, which does not factor in the district's growth and or other retired debt, but we wanted to be overly transparent about what the highest cost could be in a given year. But in all actuality, the cost would be substantially lower than that. In fact, as you can see, there an estimated levy of 16.03 mils. That's how you measure a rate of taxation for property taxes. The school district has actually lowered its mills by almost 13 over the last 2 years. And I think that's just a reflection of our board's recognition of our community's willingness to support our growing needs. And they've certainly wanted to do their part by reducing that impact as much as possible, which is certainly pretty unique for a lot of, compared to other political subdivisions in the state of North Dakota. So that 13 mil reduction is about 85% of the request here. And so we just want to, again, share that so people can take all of those factors in consideration. There's a homestead tax credit, which would help support seniors who are on fixed income. If anyone has any questions about that, feel free to put a question in the Q&A form and we can discuss that later on. The legislature is also approving a $500 property tax credit to property owners. So that is also coming. So again, a lot of factors which impact the overall bottom line, but we wanted to be sure to share the gross impact so people understood what that meant. A couple other points for reference. Sometimes mills can be a kind of a confusing way to talk about tax rates. This is almost the exact same impact as it was in 2018, as you can see there, 16.14 mils in terms of authority. Obviously, valuations have changed in many parts of our community, so we don't want to be naive to that. But when it comes to the tax rates, which is the only thing that that our school board has any control over, it's quite comparable. Even if approved, West Fargo schools would tax less than our neighbor immediately to the east. Currently, taxes for the West Fargo School District are about 15% less than Fargo Public Schools. Again, the school district has just worked as rapidly as possible to try to reduce its mill levy without sacrificing dollars invested in the classroom. What does that look like, you may be asking? Restructuring things from special assessment debt to, like some people would refinance a mortgage. We have refinanced a lot of our existing construction debt to lower the costs that taxpayers are paying in interest. So really trying to leave no stone unturned in all of the other things that relate to the operations of the school district without taking money out of the classroom that would affect compensation or class sizes.
And when and where do we vote? So this is important information. This is the actual ballot language. There will be one question. And we've been asked, can you vote for just a project? No, they're all grouped into that one measure. And so yes means you approve it as summarized, and no would mean you reject it. And then the locations, it's important to note that we have several cities in West Fargo, in the district of West Fargo. So not only are residents who have West Fargo as their address, also Harwood, Horace, Riley's Acres, and parts of Fargo. So you can see on the bottom of this slide, the parts of Fargo that would be included. But in summary, it's just important to know that if you are in the West Fargo Public Schools boundaries, you are able to vote whether you have children in the school or not. And then the locations for voting are plentiful, similar to what we've had in the past. Harwood Community Center, Westside Elementary, Lutheran Church of the Cross, Rusted, Triumph West, Horace Lutheran Church. The actual vote is taking place on September 26th, Tuesday, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And voters must bring proof of birth date and residence with them to the polling centers. And really the success, as when Mr. Bachmeyer and I talk about this, is that not whether it's a yes or a no. The success is that we have a high turnout of voters, because that will tell us that people had the information they needed. They were aware of this referendum. Levi and I have done, I think before this is over, about 20 presentations to various organizations and groups and public forums. Just wanting to make sure that everybody has the information. So if you are on this tonight, you can refer to this later for your neighbor, and look on our website. And that would be our next slide, just to show you where that information is. And if you submit questions there, even after tonight, Travis will get back to you. If he doesn't know the answer, he will ask someone who does. And we want to make sure you have all the information. So with that being said, I'm going to stop talking and see if Travis or Levi or Alicia know of any questions that we can address right away.
Yeah, so we had 2 questions come in so far. The first one would be, when we were looking at student enrollment population, what is the need for another elementary school when Meadowlark's not currently open yet?
It's a good question. I think the simplest way to probably address that one is, again, to go back to our feeder system. We have so many students in the Mustang feeder system, which is generally speaking north of 52nd Avenue, that we needed another school to relieve pressure off of some of our other large schools in the district, particularly Independence and Freedom. The school board studied this in pretty intense detail along with the task force. We looked at adding some massive expansions to existing Mustang elementary schools at both Freedom and Independence. But again, given the costs associated with that and the impacts on instruction, it was decided that that was not what was best moving forward. So we have a lot of needs. We actually have some students that will ultimately be going to Liberty that are not going to a neighborhood school. They're going to Deer Creek Elementary, which is a part of the Hawks feeder system and empties into Heritage. So we have a lot of students in that Mustang feeder system east of the river that continues to underscore the need to add a 4th elementary school north of 52nd Avenue in the Mustang feeder system. We do know every time we drive down County Road 17 that while that is everything I just said is true, we're also seeing some dramatic growth around the Horace community. And so we know that we will also need some additional space for increased homes that are going up in that area and just the general increase in enrollment that we're seeing down in the Hawks feeder system. I think Horace Elementary is a perfect example. If you look at its enrollments there and the rapid nature with which it has been growing, it will not be long before we do not have enough space across our Hawks elementary schools, which right now are Aurora, Deer Creek, Legacy, and Horace Elementary, to be able to fit all of those learners in. And so it will call for an additional elementary school that will be needed to also serve the Hawks feeder system.
And I would just add to that, Meadowlark was supposed to open this fall. And because of some of the supply chain issues and the workforce shortage, it did not. But those learners are still here, and they are being very much filled with very filled classrooms in the spaces that we're housing them for this year. The learners are here for Meadowlark. We're making do this year, but have some really, really large class sizes and some full schools. And as that continues to grow for next year, when it opens up, we'll just continue to need that space down in the next years.
The other thing I would add too is if someone is wondering, well, I haven't heard of Meadowlark Elementary before. I followed the 2018 bond referendum pretty closely. Why? Where did this school come from? The school board actually decided to dedicate a portion of its ESSER funds, some of the coronavirus relief funds, to help keep up with our growth, knowing that it would be difficult to wait until a special election occurred to address the issues. They were also aware of the workforce challenges that we were having, and so simply adding more positions and not being able to fill them would not be in the best interest of kids. So they took a approach that blended both some significant investments in additional positions to support students, as well as using some funding from our COVID funds, along with some other funds the district had to be able to construct this elementary school. So that basically tapped out our ability to do any more building on our own. But that building is being built without an additional impact on property taxpayers, which helps us continue to meet our growth in the least impactful way for our community, which continues to be a big priority for us. Travis, you said you had 2 questions. What's number 2?
Yeah, number 2 comes back to the tax implications to the residents. Part of it is, can you explain the tax implications to residents? And I believe also along the lines of, is this per household or per resident? Just a little bit on the tax side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It is on a per property, not per resident basis. So if there are 2 adults or 7 people living in a residence, that is, it's just the cost per residence, not per person. So that's I guess a great, I had never thought of that, a really great clarifying question. I can go back to that slide if that would be helpful. And so the way that property tax rates work is you take mills and then you apply them against the value of a home. So this just shows, and the reason we include $100,000 of home value, obviously we know that there are likely not many homes valued at or around 100,000, but it makes it easier to do the math at home if you want to understand what the impact on your property would be. So for instance, if you own a $250,000 home, you would take the tax impact per year just under $73, and you'd multiply that by 2.5. Again, like I said earlier, that would just be the maximum in one given year. You are not committing yourselves to spending that for 20 years. The district's tax base will continue to grow. And we will continue to retire debt. And so I don't have the numbers in terms of what the individual taxpayer will pay over the course of the full bond, simply because there's just so many things we don't know. How quickly does our tax base continue to grow? We do know, obviously, that we'll continue to pay down debt. And so this is just the maximum that you would see in a given year, but it would frankly be much lower than that. Another way that I heard it discussed is if you account for those 13 mills that were previously reduced and net that out over the past 2 years, it comes out to about $11 per 100,000 on a per residence basis. Any other questions come in, Travis?
Nope, those are the only 2 at the moment. But if anybody does have further questions, feel free to shoot them to that info@West Fargo email address on your screen there, and I will get you a response as soon as I am able.
Great. And if there were any comments that were suggested, that were shared, know that we will certainly review those as well. But just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy evening to join us for this important conversation. Like Travis said, if you have any other questions that haven't been submitted up to this point, please feel free to submit them to the info address at the bottom of this slide, and we will work to get a response to you as quickly as possible. Superintendent Sleddy, any parting words or things you'd like to add?
No, I think I just want to make sure and thank everybody for being here and for caring and for all you do for our learners and our community. If you are a family that attends Legacy Elementary, we will be meeting with the bond referendum tomorrow night at 6:30 at your school at Legacy. And then on Thursday, if you are a Deer Creek family, we will be meeting at 6:30 at Deer Creek. So same presentation, but if you have neighbors or friends, or you just want to hear it again, want to make that available to you. So thank you so much for your time tonight, and we wish everybody a nice evening.
Thank you so much. Please be sure to get out and vote. Again, a week from today, Tuesday, September 26th, polls are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. At any one of these locations. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night.